G'day humans, welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. And making people uncomfortable, including himself, is pretty much the job description of today's guest. He's a provocateur, he's a journalist, he's a comedian, he's a household name in Australia. When I was in my teens, he shot to incredible notoriety and superstardom in Australia as a contestant in an experimental television show called Race Around the World. The idea was you get 10 ordinary people, young people, you give them a video camera and you send them around the world, and each week they submit a 4-minute long documentary that they have to shoot and host and voice and edit from the road. And they send it back and it gets judged both by a panel of judges in the studio and also by the Australian people. And then a winner is crowned. And remember, this is at a time in the late 90s when we didn't have smartphones and we weren't used to the idea of filming ourselves. There was no such thing as a selfie. It was really the first moment where you could affordably and with some sort of logistical capacity have a small enough camera to just give a teenager this sort of technology. And John went around shocking Australia, shocking the world, shocking himself. He was smart, young, Jewish. He pushed back against taboos. It was quite groundbreaking. And for the rest of his career, he has always found things to prod and poke at. He did a television series called John Safran versus God. And I suppose he occupies a place in the Australian consciousness a little akin to Louis Theroux in the United Kingdom. A smart fish out of water. His latest book is about his experience trying to figure out what's going on with anti-Semitism, specifically in the context of Kanye West, or Ye. And John went to Los Angeles, tried to track down Kanye, ended up finding his house that was abandoned, not a house that he currently lives in, but a house that he owns. And John just squatted there and wrote a book about it. This is a wonderful conversation with a brilliant mind. He sort of has a go at me at one point in an interesting way for being insufficiently sensitive about anti-Semitism in Australia and sort of being too much of a brain in a vat when I bring my rational perspective to everything instead of embracing a broader truth. But I just loved this episode. I loved rumbling with him. I love the spirit that he brings to conversation and creativity. I hope you enjoy as much as I did. Oh, I should mention the book is called Squat. It's available at all good bookstores now. The one and only John Safran. Mr. Safran, it's been too long. I feel like I'm surprised this is the first time we've actually sat down and spoken.
On a couch. I've spoken to you on the phone.
We've spoken on the phone. We've spoken sort of vaguely socially. In fact, it's funny. The last time when we spoke on the phone, I remember that vividly because I was driving along icy roads in rural New Hampshire where there were no lights, and you were in Australia. And we chatted for some time about various things, about cancel culture and about bias in the media and about consequences for speaking out and about being a Jew in Australia.
And I just so remember us saying, and you saying, oh, but don't worry, John, this is all, in confidence.
Well, it is. The content is in confidence.
Ah, yeah, sure.
Does the existence of the call have to be in confidence? This is very CIA. This is very Mossad. If even the fact that we spoke has to be a secret.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be a secret.
I mean, you know what Jews are like. We do. The cabal does hide behind on icy roads in rural New Hampshire.
Yeah, there will be that.
Confer.
That's how it will be on one of those carousels on Instagram where they're kind of like trying to make the Jews look shifty. It will be like, and Zeps and Safran had a conversation.
Yes, that's right.
And somehow the icy road also will add some like some little mystery.
There were no lights. Also, I was in the Great Satan. I was in America at the time.
Yeah.
So 2 acolytes of the Little Satan.
Yes.
One of them in the Great Satan. Or
I'm
conferring.
I'm arguably even the biggest Satan, which was in East St Kilda in Melbourne.
Right.
Where all
a lot of Jews in
a lot of
St
Jews.
Kilda.
They're very suspicious, isn't it? There?
And a lot of money. So you do the math. A lot of money, a lot of Jews. How are you doing anyway? This is a great book, Squat.
Yes.
A week squatting at Kanye's mansion.
Yes.
How did you come to be squatting at Kanye's mansion?
Well, it's not my fault. Right. And also, I didn't plan to squat there. It unrolled in front of me.
Of course you planned.
No,
of course you planned it.
No.
How do you always end up accidentally finding yourself in absurd and provocative situations?
So the starting point was, you know how in all these debates, in these geopolitical things, it's like they started it, right?
Yes.
I think it's fair for me to say that Kanye West was the one. He came out, if you don't know this, he came out in support of Adolf Hitler. And he went on the Alex Jones podcast.
But did he? So what did he say though? Because did he support? I suppose
you're so in a fight. You're so in the mood for a fight. Suddenly, just to be, the devil's advocate.
I'm both sides. Hitler.
You're on Kanye and Hitler's side, even. But it was also, I'm so bad at arguing. I don't blame you. I can't tell you how often there's something about the way I argue that the other person always goes on the other side.
But
even if
that's
they're on my
thing.
side,
you know me.
Okay,
I'm always trying to pick holes in things.
You're already like, this poor little guy,
Kanye
and Hitler. Why are you picking on them, John? No. So he said that everyone brings good to the world, especially Hitler. So
right.
Yes. So if you
especially.
So if you want to be really
not even.
If you want to
even Hitler.
No. If you want to have especially Hitler. And he'd also tweeted things like, tomorrow I'm going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And so he
said that he was drunk when on some kind of benzo.
I have not heard that he was drunk.
Who among us has not?
Yeah, I know.
Tweeted silly things about killing Jews.
So he was getting a bit excitable, and he was saying it's because he didn't like his various contracts that he had, like in the music industry and the fashion industry,
because Jews control it.
And he was saying because the Jews can control it or whatever. So he'd started that, and for me, this was just there are a lot of things in place for me to be curious and want to dig deeper. And before I went to LA, before I even had like this idea of sort of chasing it up in the real world, I did a little bit of investigation, and for instance, he on his Instagram account, he named these by name. He named these 3 Jewish bankers from Chase Morgan to sort of, name and shame.
Right.
And I looked into it, and none of the 3 were Jewish. The 3 Jewish bankers, there were 2.
Which seems negligent because there are a lot of Jewish bankers.
Yeah, exactly. But his ones, there were 2 Greek Orthodox. Okay. It was really funny. Like,
well, swarthy.
Yeah. For one of them, like it's on the Chase, like Kanye just needed to do a simple Google. It's on the Chase Morgan website, like under his bio, he goes, I'm a proud deacon at my local Greek Orthodox church. That's in his bio on the Chase Morgan site. So I thought that was kind of interesting about how he'd sort of he'd projected Jewishness onto these non-Jews to sort of have this story in his head that supported what he was feeling. So then I decided, I'm going to... And also the fact that he was a mainstream celebrity, like people who aren't familiar with my work, I've been for yonks, been exploring...
That means for a very long time in Australian.
In Australian.
Yeah.
I've been exploring in the fringes, maybe a bit like if you know like Louis Theroux or John Ronson, that kind of character in Australia. And like them, when we started off, you used to have to like get into a 4-wheel drive and like drive through the woods of Mississippi for 3 hours to arrive at the kind of the Klansman's house to kind of get these stories. And then somehow around 2015, like all these fringes started getting dragged into the mainstream, and all these like esoteric views on race and stuff that... And also, I guess it's because of the internet and social media, it just started being drawn more into the mainstream. And so I found it really interesting that this dude who couldn't have been more famous, Kanye West, he was the one who was, like if he was more sloppy about it and just like, I don't like the Jew or whatever like that, but he was like dragging in these quite esoteric things, like from the Black Hebrew Israelites and from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So it's like, what the hell is a pop star doing that? Then on top of that, the fact that he was a Black American, or he is a Black American, that made it interesting because a lot of other, people, because everyone likes having a go at, some textbook neo-Nazi. Like, it's kind of fun. Like, I'm sort of, and then I could just feel that there were a lot of people going, oh God, I'd love to have it, but why does he have to be black?
Right.
You know, like, can't it have been a white guy? I don't know. Who's like a white, can't it have been Macklemore or Vanilla Ice? Why couldn't it be Vanilla Ice?
Yeah.
Or Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys? Why did it have to be a black?
Or like a country singer.
Yeah, that would have been
a white
great.
Country singer being found for, but as you say, their anti-Semitism would be likelier to be just a sort of generalized, vague distaste for the Jew.
Oh, yes.
Whereas what is interesting about Kanye is that, as you say, it's quite specific. And like, I just had Candace Owens on the show as well, where like there's a very detailed theory of the case about how there are subsects of like Frankists and like people in the 19th century who did this, and like then, you know, the libel and the like they got a theory. They got a theory the way a 9/11 truther, who she also happens to be, has a theory.
I'd also say, anyway, so closing my thought, it's like for other people it would be like, but that sort of drew me in more because I just found that more interesting. Because
you want to critique black people because you're a flagrant racist.
No. Well, no. But it's like, and also for people who don't know, like I'm Jewish myself, so therefore I was able to bring in my own personal story and so like stories more than like, it's not like I'm studying some academic theory of that. It's like, well, you know, in this way and that way over my life. And, you know, my grandparents said this person. So it kind of just as storytelling, it made it super interesting. I think another thing about Kanye and possibly your friend Candace, although I don't know too much about what?
Friend?
Yes. Is that they're American. And I think the Americanness of things is often left out when we kind of analyze things. It's almost considered, it's just so, that's the norm, and you don't even have to question the Americanness compared to the non-Americanness. And also this other thing.
Wait, what do you mean about the Americanness?
Well, for instance, thinking everything refracts off America or comes from America and is a very American thing. I'll give you an example. What I mean is that you have Joseph Smith, who founded the Mormonism. You've got Charles Manson, famous cult leader.
Okay.
So let's just stick with those two. They both thought Christ is going to return. Oh, sorry. In both cases, it's like Christ is central, is in America. Charles Manson said, when Jesus Christ returns, it's going to be not only in America, but where I grew up in LA.
Right.
And Joseph Smith going against all archaeological and historical evidence, going, then Jesus came
and the lost tribes of Israel were in the Middle West or something.
Compare that to Australia. And there was once these somewhere, I think it was in far north Queensland, or it was in Queensland, and they came out and they were telling everyone that Jesus was going to come to Queensland. And everyone in Australia just instinctively laughs. And I guess the reason they're laughing is they're going, like, lol, why would Jesus come? Like, it's so...
of all the places he could go.
We instinctively know it's like self-indulgent. To sort of,
right.
And so Americans always think everything's America. And then on top of that, I've noticed, and this is by going...
some Americans.
Yeah, some. Sorry, I didn't mean... Oh, by the way, I'm not saying...
Hashtag not all Americans.
Yeah, not all Americans. And also, obviously, I love Americans for that, and I love, or whatever. So I'm not having a go. I'm just trying to like add a layer of things. Of course, blah, blah, blah. But I've also noticed hyphenated Americans, whether that's Jewish Americans or Muslim or black or trans or gay or whatever. They're very hyper aware of one side of the hyphen.
Yep.
And they're not aware of
the American.
So for instance, if you're going to have a conversation about who holds cultural sway, cultural power, like if you want that conversation, and at book festivals, at least all the ones I've gone to over the decade, like that's a conversation. Who owns cultural power, right? And okay, cool. I reckon two of the big ones, maybe the two biggest ones, are Americans and English speakers. Like, but that's not like discussed at these book festivals. It's like, we're very concerned. There's kind of like people are being left out of conversation because of cultural power. I've never been to one where it's like, well, yes, if you speak English, and also, do we have to worry about how English is being spread and becoming the norm through the internet at hyperspeed? So therefore, local languages are being like, that's the conversation.
Yeah,
that doesn't really get. And also, the whole American one, where if you're a hyphenated American and you write books, or you're in America, and you want to talk about who holds cultural power, and you leave out the bit Americans. is I find that interesting. So and I think that ties back into.
So let me clarify this.
Yes.
In the hierarchy of like oppression and power dynamics, right, where you're supposed to be able to punch up but not punch down, and we're supposed to elevate marginalized voices.
Yeah.
Am I right in interpreting what you're saying as being like we have a limited understanding of that hierarchy because although we accept that there's a hierarchy of the sexes in which men are supposedly on top, of the races in which white people are supposedly on top, of the gender identities in which cis people are supposedly on top, we don't extend the same logic to nationalities, and we don't extend in which obviously Americans are on top.
Yeah.
Even maybe a trans woman of color American might wield more power in being heard globally than a white male. Well, maybe she may than a white male working class Frenchman. Right? It's possible.
Maybe it's
possible that she gets more book contracts than the white working class Frenchman. And then you've also got, I'm including in that the English speaking component, where if you only speak Bangladeshi, you're a bit fucked in terms of global cultural influence.
I kind of find it just interesting in the first place to like bring that up and let some other person kind of see where the cards fall. I mean,
why don't you want to get cancelled?
No. It's not that I don't want to be cancelled. It's just I don't know how to micromanage whether this trans French speaker is kind of getting more cancelled than the other.
It's not a trans French speaker. It's a cis French speaker and a trans American.
Okay, sure.
Have you learnt nothing from the past 30 seconds?
I think it's interesting. Like, I even noticed this when, because when I was young, when I was in high school, I was so obsessed with hip hop, so obsessed. I went to this Orthodox
cultural appropriation
Jewish school. And like we had Torah classes and everything, but my whole mindset the whole time was not Torah or Kabbalah or anything like that. It was like the lyrics of Public Enemy and LL Cool J and stuff like that. So anyway, I was similar, and I loved the storytelling so much, and it just opened up my mind so much. Like, oh, this is great. There's like this art form where like the storytelling can be witty and and it can have a beginning, middle, and end. God, I love this so much. But even then, I was kind of going, oh, isn't there this kind of this tangle there where, for instance, I know Farmers Boulevard, which is a street in New York because it's mentioned in LL Cool J songs, and I don't know the capital of Romania, and so therefore, when Chuck D from Public Enemy would come and say, hip hop is Black America's CNN, and it was like, then it's true, and it's like great, and but there was this balance of it's like, oh, it's that hip hop is part of American cultural power.
Yeah.
But having said that, I cannot stress enough, it deserves to be. It's in a meritocracy, absolutely. Hip hop should, at least back then, should be on top.
Yes, but the point of social justice is not that there is something unmeritocratic about inequality. It's that inequality in itself ought to be recognized and understood as a form of power, right? That power.
I'm the victim. I
think it's a legitimate point to make that the rest of the world lives in a world in which we all know Times Square, Venice Beach, Cape Canaveral, the Oval Office. You know, we know Farmers Boulevard in your case. Not being a hip hop fan, not my main New York, touch point, cornerstone, but the Ed Sullivan Theatre where David Letterman taped his show. I could have pinpointed it on a map for you at the age of 8. So yes, and that counts for something. And you're right that's counting for something is absent from the conversation about power.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. 2015 you marked as a sort of a time when this whole kind of anti-Semitism, like Jewish conspiracy thing started popping up in your feed, so to speak, in the mainstream. Yeah. What happened?
I don't know. There was sort of like a bubbling in the universe. That's when I saw this thing on Facebook, and it said that there was going to be this skinhead rally in Melbourne, in the Melbourne CBD. And this was the left who was putting that out there. And it said, come to the counter rally. And I was just so confused because, again, like this whole thing of like costumed and visual far right people, that had been at rest. moribund for quite a while. Like, that's not saying there wasn't racism and there wasn't right-wingness and extreme right-wingness, but it was like, it wasn't theatrical. People weren't walking around with plans.
Do you like the theatrical version or the subtle version? I quite like the theatrical. I like my anti-Semites, in a group where I can see them waving things, chanting.
I'm a far worse person than you, because I from my point of view, I've got this philosophy. It's almost my only philosophy is bad for the world, good for the book. So obviously, from the point of view,
not at all cynical.
Yes, obviously it's like far more advantageous to me if those far right people are.
I'm not even sure that I concede that it's bad for the world. Yeah, if you're gonna have bigotry,
yes,
I want it flagrant and loud and obvious and in a particular place.
Okay,
I don't want it. Like, isn't that the whole point about like structural inequality and like systemic racism and bigotry and stuff? Like, you don't want it. You don't want it bleeding through institutions in subtle ways and lingering in the back of people's minds. You want them all there in Federation Square, some tiki torches, maybe some Klansman hoods.
Can I just stress that occasionally I'm going, that's more just general social lubricant in a conversation where it's like, okay, so I better fill up the space here or whatever. I'm not necessarily agreeing with everything here. But anyway, so I turned up, and for people around the world, Melbourne is considered is seen as like the Portland of Australia, like where all the hipsters are. And it's really, and it's genuinely multicultural more than other places in Australia in some ways. And so it was just rattling that there was going to be the.
But it's also the most Jewish city
in Australia.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, part of it, yes. So, but having said that, to put it in context, there's not many Jews in Australia. What we're 0.4% of
it's a fraction of
it's a fraction of a fraction. So it's not. I mean, you really have to localize and go to there's one suburb in Melbourne that you could kind of sort of say is the equivalent of New York, where you actually feel that there's like a Jewish culture there. And even there,
I don't think there's anywhere in Australia.
And even there, it's kind of over-egged. Like when people would talk about some electorate being a Jewish electorate or whatever, like the one electorate that's that. When you actually look at it,
it's 8%.
Yeah, it's
Jewish
it's like a minority even there. But so, and that's when I turned up to this what was going to be a raucous skinhead rally, and it was true. There were these far right people that were classic that you'd usually only see like in a pub once a year. Like the far right might. There might be 8 of them in a pub once a year, and they've got their neo-Nazi music and stuff like that. And they were there, but I did notice that the far right had expanded since last time, and there was like a Sri Lankan minister, and he was there on the side with the other far right people. So and then there was some African and there was some Asian. But I was like so thrown that this new far right, because the rally was an anti-multicultural rally.
Oh,
and it was particularly targeted at Muslims, at Australian Muslims, right? And so I was so confused. I'm going, how come this anti-multicultural rally on the side of the anti-multiculturalist, you've got, as well as having these far right people, far right white Australians, you've also got some Sri Lankans and Indians and Asians, and that's where I started. I began to understand. Oh, they're two things. Lots of them are evangelical Christians, and so they kind of don't like the Muslims from this kind of other angle to the white nationalists. But then on top of that, they were recent immigrants to Australia, relatively recent. So they'd come to Australia after the last time there was a real outburst with Pauline Hanson.
Who was a right-wing anti-immigrant politician in the 90s.
So these people have kind of immigrated since then, so they kind of missed out. And
on the first wave of anti-immigrant sentiment.
Yeah, and they had their perception of Australia and what Australia was, I would say, was like different to what... like they in their heads, they were trying to be normal Australians.
Yes.
Not like why. And then, but I'd say they kind of got it a bit, like they had this misconception. So for instance, they thought Christianity was way more part of it. So I went to this Sri Lankan minister's church, for instance, and they had the Australian flags, but with Jesus and prayer hands embroidered in it. And
is it not crime to deface the national flag?
And that's fine. I'm not having a go at that. But what I am saying, what I am saying is that normal, like they put the Australian flags up because they thought it would make them look more like normal Australians.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not.
And they're like, you know what else will make us look normal, like normal Australians?
Yeah.
Jesus hands.
Yeah. And it's like, that is so not what.
We're one of the most secular countries in the world.
Yeah.
But I think you may also be overthinking this, which is one of John Safran's many charms, in the sense that it's not at all uncommon for migrants of a generation ago to be concerned about immigration in the present day because they feel, I mean, look at the fact that Donald Trump has higher support among blacks and Latinos than any Republican candidate in decades or generations, I think.
Okay.
Like, people come in, they think we obeyed the rules, we did the right thing, we assimilated, we came here because we're fans of liberal democracy, we were fans of Australia or America or something.
Yeah.
Now there are these new waves of people who don't want to speak the language. I mean, I'm not saying this is a true characterization of what's taking place, but from their perspectives of those new migrant communities, they're saying these new guys aren't playing by the rules the way that we did. They're getting all these handouts that we never got. They're, creating sub-communities of their own that we never hid inside. Like,
yeah, okay, so two things. One, there's a sliding scale of things. So there's immigrant community people, like why wouldn't they be, who are like liberal voters or a bit right-wing or a bit conservative? Then there's kind of hanging out on the streets with the uniformed far right white nationalists. So that's sort of, that's definitely interesting because the white nationalists who are there, they might be thinking, oh, this is good for our look to have some people of color here, but they don't. They are white nationalists and they're into genetics and everything. So therefore, that makes it interesting. Then the other thing,
but they've got a quota. They've got a quota for people of color just to make it make sure that their diversity metrics are met. Yeah,
it was kind of interesting because they're both using each other to try to present themselves as normal. So the white nationalists are like, oh, this is a good look for us, and then like the pox. They're going,
the POC, the peoples of colour.
Oh, we look normal now because we're with these normal white Australians, not realising that most white Australians don't think
the way that they do. Yeah,
don't think the uniformed kind of neo-Nazis are like, classic Aussies. But then, and the second thing is that kind of writing about it is other writers would just dodge around that. Other writers would have been a bit uncomfortable going, oh, no, I want the story to be about these white far-right people. So I'm almost not going to see that these other people have kind of been absorbed into it. Whilst because I'm, in a good way, I defend myself, a bit of a troll, like a bit of like, oh, people don't
I think troll is unfair. I think you and I both share an instinct to just speak the truth that we see, instead of
and also just seeing things that are interesting and therefore putting it on the page or whatever. So therefore in that book, like I wrote about that, and I'm kind of feel like that's on the record now, and that's on the record because I went down there and saw this new thing and then wrote about it when like other people would have been like, oh, first of all, not turned up there in the first place, and then kind of they would have looked past all the little tangles because they're not trolls.
Yeah,
like
and
me.
so then the don't say trolls.
Okay, sure.
Fearless interrogator of the truth.
Yeah, and enjoying. No, I think I like where cultural fault lines where they don't quite fit.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
I think a lot of my work is about looking at that. And then you can put it in a sense of proportion because I'm not making out like, oh, that's the whole thing above everything else. But it's like, it is something worth noting.
There was an interesting line that I once heard when we were talking about minorities, which was that the smallest minority is the individual.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Right? The smallest minority is a minority of one. And actually the individuals who are aberrant within the context of their minority are super interesting stories.
Yeah, totally.
So the Sikh South Asian person who does not behave like a normal Sikh South Asian person but is in bed with the white nationalists.
Yeah,
that's fascinating and worth interrogating rather than glossing over.
And if you're a storyteller, it's worth telling just on that sense, in the sense you just said there. And of course someone can go, well, oh, he's such an aberration. It's like, yeah, but that's not, I'm not like from polling company. I'm not a politician. I'm a storyteller. And the stories of individual people can be
Yeah, and also in order to understand phenomena, I think you need to understand the edges of the phenomena. Like it's not good enough to just take an average of you don't learn a lot. It's like in a philosophy class when, the lecturer comes in and goes, so why don't we eat babies? Like what's wrong with eating babies? There are babies die every day. Why don't we eat dead babies? Like it's only by asking a ridiculous question like that you come to understand why it is that we have the ethics that we do. If you just only take the sort of median ethical position, then you never actually understand where you stand, never understand the world. So take me on the journey from that neo-Nazi rally in Melbourne to the inflation of this ideology, this anti-Semitism, into a kind of a conspiratorial, ideological online thing that then ends up captivating Kanye and his ilk to such an extent that you get on a plane and fly to California.
Yeah, well, I guess I could see how easily people could bring together strands, even like local strands. Like in Australia, we had the Port Arthur massacre. When was that? That was in the 90s. Maybe not 96.
That was in the 90s because John Howard was the Prime Minister and he implemented the very controversial gun law reform after that. That was the worst massacre in Australian
I started seeing
history.
things online where they just take these international things, like their protocols of the learned elders of Zion, and they take some like Ron Paul individual libertarian rights, and they kind of like mulch it together in New South Wales or in Australia, they'd mulch it together as like, oh, did you know that both the actual massacre was like, it was coordinated by Mossad and to try to get rid of the guns. And I just saw how you could just use this blueprint of the Jews.
And wait, you were seeing this at the time or you're seeing this within the past 5 years?
No, at the time, sort of like.
Really?
Yeah, sort of online. And I just saw how you can just put this blueprint of Jewish power and the Jewish octopus, and you can franchise it and you just apply it locally to the Port Arthur massacre and kind of go, oh, that was Mossad or whatever. Then, so I guess it's not surprising that in that sense that Kanye was able to like pull these things together and create a big conspiracy about.
Yeah, but I mean, the Mossad being behind Port Arthur is such a fringe claim that I've never even heard of its existence until this moment.
Yeah,
but
sure.
The things that Kanye is talking about are now, they occupy a significant minority of public consciousness online.
Yeah, sure. And he was the one who helped bring it to a new generation. But anyway, so I was just, in the same way I was drawn to, what the hell, there's going to be a skinhead rally in multicultural Melbourne. I'm going to go to Los Angeles and try to chase up this thing about like, what's up with Kanye?
And so
anyways,
take us to the squatting.
Yeah. So I spent about a week and a half, 2 weeks going around New York and LA and hearing and when, at least when I'm writing a book, I'm not always sure what I'm doing at the start, and it's like this slowly congeals. So for all I knew when I went over there, I was going to use Kanye's story to tell the story of how, through the ages, from Michelangelo to Taylor Swift, artists have had uneasy relationships with their benefactors, and I'm going to look into that or whatever. But then it started to be more about using the history of Jewish Americans and Black Americans and how they're sometimes allies, but also sometimes prickly, to kind of tell the story of how of identity and how it's so important to us, or to most of us. Yes, yet it's kind of so arbitrary and it's so fickle. So that's I started talking to a lot of people who have like interesting, colorful, eccentric points of view about that. And like I talked to Professor Griff, who was from Public Enemy, so that was awesome because childhood hero. I spoke to a rabbi in Monsey in New York State, who a Black Hebrew Israelite had come into their Hanukkah ceremony only a few weeks earlier, brandishing a machete. Actually, I shouldn't say a Black Hebrew. A man who the FBI later found out had Black Hebrew Israelite teachings.
And just explain to people who aren't familiar with that terminology what a black Hebrew Israelite means.
Yeah, so they look at the Torah, the Old Testament, and they say when it's mentioned in there, like the Jews or the Hebrews or whatever, that's us. That's us.
It's actually black
and black
people.
Americans.
Yeah,
like and that white Jews, your European Jews or whatever, they've stolen that from us. Like, I don't know whether it's 1,000 years. So I don't know exactly where, but it's like in that maniacal way that Jews are always up to something. Somehow the white Jews stole the identity, even though they're not the ones mentioned in the Torah. So they're extra furious at the Jews.
I asked you to clarify because the name can sound misleading. When you say black Hebrew Israelites, it sounds like they might be pro-Jew, but they're actually one of the most anti-Semitic groups in the world.
Yeah, but in such a tangled way because they take the symbols of the Jews. So, for instance, at the Black Hebrew Israelite Center in Harlem, there's a Star of David on the outside. And usually if you're running an anti-Jewish organization...
Usually that's a bit Jewy. It's a good clue you're a bit Jewy.
And they have the list of... Because in the Old Testament, the Torah, they name these tribes of Israel, like the Jewish tribes, and most of them have... we no longer know who they are or where they went or whatever. And so you have people say, I'm one of the lost tribes. My people are one of the lost tribes. So outside the Black Hebrew Israelite Center, they name the 12 lost tribes and they match it up with these are Puerto Ricans, these are Negroes, these are Venezuela. I forget what all they are. But none of them are.
Identity gets complicated.
None of them are like European.
No,
Jews.
And sometimes Jews will get attacked on the New York subway or something by some of these people who are convinced that they are interlopers taking over there.
So I spoke to a lot of people who had interesting views on, and sometimes with more of a connection to Kanye, and sometimes, but now like everyone's connected to Kanye in a way. Like like I spoke to his like pastor. I spoke to Gavin McGuinness.
Yes.
I know he gets very angry if you get his surname wrong or whatever.
Why? How would you get it wrong?
McGuinness? I don't know. He just seems to be like he's very tolerant of a lot of things except mispronouncing his surname.
Is he very tolerant of a lot of things? He doesn't strike me as very tolerant of a lot of things.
Anyway, because he coordinated a meeting.
He was the founder of the Proud Boys.
Yes.
Far right.
Yes. And he's kind of seen as far right, and he's got a real bee in his bonnet about trans people and about feminists and what else. But you know how like people on extremes, sometimes I've just got interesting little things.
Then when I say far right, I should clarify because we're talking about wild anti-Semites. Gavin is not a skinhead who goes around beating up Jews and stuff, right?
Gavin is far from that. He, even though he doesn't like all these other people, he says that he really likes the Jews, right?
Right.
And so he's going to...
he doesn't go around... He's not a skinhead who goes around beating up anybody. He's as far as I'm aware, right? Gavin is like an intellectual guy who founded this kind of like drinking club, bro-y sort of collection of young guys who were fed up with political correctness and wanted to assert a more robust kind of white vision of masculinity. Would that be...
Sure.
fair?
There's little tangles in it. Like, for instance, the dude who replaced him, seeing we're so obsessed with identity, the Afro-Cuban American who replaced him got busted in that January 6th thing, and I think he's in prison. So, and no, they definitely got involved in street fights or whatever. But the thing with Gavin that was interesting for my story is that he just... Even though he's got these problems with all these other people that you'd associate a right-wing figure to have, he says he likes the Jews, he loves the Jews. So he actually tried to convince Kanye to knock it off with his Jew hatred. And he met up with Kanye and pitched the case for the Jews.
Right.
And he just said he couldn't get there. Like, he just said that Kanye's just... He said like it's a combo of an uneasy... or a hard to pin down combination of things. One was he's just stuck in his ways. And the other was how much is Kanye being an artist and a, provoking artist compared with he literally believes in like the teachings of Hitler. And and Gavin says he can't quite unpick, where it starts and where it ends. And I found that interesting, and I write about that, about how like David Bowie in the 70s used to play with Nazi iconography, and the Sex Pistols did, and like in the case of the Sex Pistols, it was absolutely more complicated than, oh, hey, we're the Sex Pistols. We believe in Nazism, so therefore Sid Vicious is going to wear a swastika. Like it was using it as this symbol of transgression. And also it was more, I think in the case of the Sex Pistols, it was more, this upsets the English establishment and this is far closer to the end of World War II than now. And they wanted to upset the British English establishment. England, of course, fought against the Nazis. So therefore, and also when it comes to the artists and stuff, they're not all that bright. And
that's another point I was going to make.
No, I don't mean bright. That's really the wrong way.
No, wait. Let me give you an out here.
They're not informed.
Let me give you an out
here.
So
they're not even connecting the dots as much. That, they're just going a bit like I when I was young, I was attracted to the skeletons on the heavy metal album covers. They're kind of getting attracted to the swastika as young people who don't really know the context of things.
Well, there may also be another thing going on with the Sex Pistols in the 70s, which I may be reading too much into this, but British society was still very anti-Semitic. And so there may have been you guys won the war, but you're actually fucking hypocrites when it comes to Jews, and we're going to wear swastikas, not only to upset you, but to call you on. I may be overthinking that, but it would be a kind of an interesting satirical point to make to shock an anti-Semitic British establishment by going full Nazi on them. On the point about, these people not necessarily being the most intelligent people, one thing that I'm finding really interesting in this moment of our informational space and social media and everything is, and sort of make America great again and like the far right in Europe, is what fidelity people have to what they claim to believe, and how much they actually believe what they claim they believe, and how much what they believe or what they profess to believe is actually just a sort of a social or cultural game, sometimes an expression of tribal allegiance. How much did the people who claimed to believe that Hillary Clinton had pedophiles in a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. actually believe that was literally true, and how much was it a marker of a tribe? How much?
I think marker of a tribe is a big thing. It's a big thing. It's a bit like with footy, where you just sit there and you notice and make a big deal whenever the umpire makes a decision against you, but you just kind of ignore and you go along with the mythology.
During the recent, I don't know if you followed any of the conspiracy theories during the recent hurricanes in the United States, but there was a deluge of misinformation, often retweeted by Elon Musk or even by elected representatives, about how the Federal Emergency Management Agency was intentionally thwarting people's rescue efforts, making things worse. At the extremes, some of these conspiracy theories were alleging that the federal government was controlling the weather and pushing the hurricanes into areas where they would exert maximum devastation on communities, on white, working class, Trump supporting communities, stuff like that. And when called on this kind of rumor mongering, some of the Congress people who had been peddling it are sort of like, well, that may not be literally true, but it does point to a broader concern that a lot of people have about the unelected unaccountability of our deep state and what they're doing. So it's so what you claim to believe is actually not really a belief. It speaks to either a greater truth or what side you want to be on. And so when it comes to Kanye, I suspect some of it might just be I don't like being put in a box where I'm expected to think a certain way because I'm a black man.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm just going to say a bunch of things that I profess to believe about race.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And then sometimes I'll, also just spitball. It's the same with Trump.
People say, I spoke to you before I'd written this book. My book would be more coherent. But that's about the things of markers of the tribe. You are right. It seems... And, Kanye West, as well as being an American, as well as being a black American, as well as being a man, he's Gen X, like Gavin McGuinness. And so when he's doing his wearing a White Lives Matter T-shirt and putting that on his models at the French fashion show, that is Like in the context of now, that's like, oh my God, or whatever. In the context of like some Gen Xer 20 years ago, that would just be such a classic Gen X troll.
Right.
That like, that you could kind of soak out or not have it have all this heightened sort of like racial meaning or whatever. It'd just be like it's like you said, it's like, I'm not meant to say this.
Yeah.
That seems a bit
It's sort of like Trey Parker and Matt Stone wearing dresses to the Emmys or whatever. It's just like being a provocateur.
Oh, by the way, Matt Stone makes a very special guest appearance in my book, Squat. I like how my book has very special guest stars in it.
It's like, fabulous.
It's like Elvis Costello's in the elevator and you're waiting for like, why is he in the? Oh, John's now going to go out to dinner with Elvis Costello, and it's like just because I don't know how books work. I just thought I'll have a cameo appearance. But another thing about cultural markers and politics I've thought about is just say Trump when COVID came in, just said, you know, the authorities of deep state, they're trying to keep the masks away from you. They're trying to keep all the masks to themselves, and because they're trying to kill you with this thing, right? And then. Masks
Which was briefly true.
Yeah. But masks could have been the opposite. Like Trump could have pitched the case that like the mask is like us protecting it's like the mask
protect yourself against the deep state.
Conservatism.
Yeah.
And then all these companies that always advertise on Alex Jones that put out I don't know, guns and whatever. They could have put out these cool looking, more Darth Vader looking.
Yeah.
And the whole thing could have been.
The problem is you need a mask mandate.
Yeah.
And so, the moment the government is imposing a mask mandate, then that narrative no longer works. But I know what you're saying. You could have done the same with vaccines as well. Like you could have, but it gets tricky because if part of the Make America Great Again ethos is a certain rugged individualism and libertarianism, then that bumps into problems whenever you come to collective action or group coercion. But I mean, Trump is an interesting person on this question of like how much do people believe the things that they say they believe? Because I can fully imagine Gavin McInnes sitting down with Kanye, persuading him that the Jews are not a nefarious cabal running the world.
Yeah.
Kanye being persuaded in the moment and then walking away and 5 minutes later reading something online and completely flipping back again in the same way that I think Trump does. Like people often ask me, do you think that Trump believes the things that he says that he believes? And I think that's kind of the wrong question. I don't think belief is really salient for a person like Trump. Does something work? Does the profession of belief achieve goals? It's almost like Jordan Peterson sometimes talks about this in kind of like higher, more epistemic sort of ways, which is like what is true is what works. Like if a religion, for example, to channel Jordan Peterson, works to create like a fulfilled spiritual life and a cohesive culture, then to what does it mean to say that it's not true? Like it's a very kind of pragmatic utilitarian attitude towards truth. And at the risk of getting totally philosophically sidetracked, I think there's something there in like the minds of a Kanye or a Trump where they're not hyper intelligent guys necessarily in a book learning kind of way. So they're not super concerned with what is literally true or false. What they're concerned with is like, how does this make me feel? How does it make people around me feel? How does it make them react to me? And does it achieve the things that I want to get done?
Yeah, that's really good. And then with Kanye, there'd be all that. And then the extra layer, because he's an artist and he's into aesthetics and some of this far-right conspiracy stuff just has interesting aesthetics that sort of...
like what?
He's like wearing like the black balaclava, like militaristic stuff.
Right.
Fascist stuff can have, and it provokes people. And then it's like him as an artist, this is provoking people. My music provokes people. So yeah, it gets very tricky. So you're probably wondering how I ended up in his mansion. So what happened was, well, first of all, I found out that there was this homeless dude who he'd been thrown out, but he'd moved into one of Kanye's schoolhouses. Kanye's a bit like, like you might say, oh, I've got to build a shelf, and then you start and it's all too hard and you just leave it. And Kanye's that, but with millions and millions of dollars, and people will just do it. So he'll say, I need to set up a school, and then next thing you know, there's a schoolhouse painted matte black that's in the middle of the woods in Simi Valley.
With an Australian flag and a Jesus prayer hands on the outside.
That's in the middle of Simi Valley. which is sort of like a more woody and tree area of Los Angeles. And then anyway, so it was, and so I went there, and he'd been bored. I think that was the explanation. Like, he'd kind of set up this school and then just got.
Are there any students at the school?
No, there were no students at the school. The reason I knew it was his school, though, was because all over the floor were these unpaid, unopened utility bills addressed to the Donda Academy, which was the name of the school named after his mother, and also personally to Kanye West. So it's like, this is definitely a school. And there were just little signs of things. There was some kids' pictures with finger painting, and it had, Chicago and Psalm, which are the name of him and Kim's kids there. So it was that. But I got the impression that one of two things that happened. There was an active school here, and everything had been moved out, or that, he'd started setting up this one and then just bored. And then,
Wow.
And I think it was more of the latter. So anyway, at this abandoned school, there was this shiny new bicycle and this piece of card next to it, a brown cardboard, and it said, "Kanye, where are you? Yee, where are you? If you see this, ring this number. We're all looking for you," or whatever like that. Anyway, so of course I rang the number. And then
they could just email his Jew manager, who I'm sure would be able to put them in touch.
So I rang this guy, and he was being a bit like, he'd go, "Oh, yes, I know Kanye and I work with him," or whatever. Then
this is the person who wrote the note?
Yes.
Okay.
So then I caught up with him, and he turned up with and he had like plastic bags filled with like his clothes that he was walking around with. And he had his business partner with him, who was this other guy carrying his belongings in these plastic bags. And he had one of his eyes was missing, and it kind of the skin had grown over it. Anyway, so I met up with these two people who were like behind
Wait a second. What? Are they homeless people?
Yeah.
Right.
So
okay.
they were the ones who written the sign. And so I was talking to the guy, and he was like a big Christian. And when he found out I was Jewish, he was trying to convert me to Jesus, of course, in the most offensive way possible. Your stupid religion and all this stuff. Like, anyway, the long and the short of it is,
like, my religion gave birth to your religion, bitch.
I know. The guy with the two eyes, he had he was from Connecticut, just had a normal job, and then either God or Kanye or some combo spoke to him and said, "You have to come and meet me." So he went from Connecticut all the way to that Simi Valley schoolhouse. He found out where it was,
right?
And then Kanye wasn't there, and so he didn't know what to do, but didn't have a place. So he stayed there.
Okay.
For like a month until Kanye's people came and kicked him out. Anyway, so that kind of planted in my head, like, in that subtle.
So you were like, if it's good enough for a one-eyed homeless Christian,
yes,
it's good enough for John Saffran.
Yeah. So then one of his other mansions, he's got a few mansions, and this one was in Calabasas, which is rural and not how most people imagine LA. So in this street, for instance, one of the houses has a horse stable in it, and it's very quiet or whatever. But
it's like the northern outskirts of Los Angeles, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm bad with north, south, east, and west.
Okay.
I will just say it's a real wealthy area. For instance, that's where the gated community Hidden Hills is, where like Kim Kardashian and Drake all have places.
Mm-hmm.
But separate from that, he's got this big mansion there, and wandering around and talking to neighbors, and I found out the neighbor across the road, I said, "Oh, is it nice living here with Kanye?" And he goes, "Nah, I hate it." And it's like, he said that Kanye had this Sunday service and all the cars would come blocking in everything. And he goes, "But, haven't seen Kanye here for months and months and months and months." And then he said on top of that, which went bing in my brain, he said, "Oh, and he used to have these security people, one would drive out at night and the other would drive in. And the gates open and close." And he goes, "But even that wrapped up about 2 weeks ago." So now I'd heard that there was this mansion, Kanye's mansion, and also probably not security. So then in my head, I was going, I need like a writer's retreat. Because I've just done all these interviews with all these people, with Matt Stone, with Gavin McGinnis,
right.
with Professor Griffith, all this stuff around.
And the standard West Hollywood is expensive.
Yeah,
when you're paying Australian dollars.
Yeah, so I thought, why not just move into Kanye's mansion in Calabasas and use it as my writer's retreat? So that's why the book's called Squat.
Yeah,
a week squatting at Kanye's mansion. So yes,
and then you subsequently sent him a check for value of your estate.
No, if he's watching this might be the first time he hears about it. I didn't.
All right, yay. Yeah. Maybe Candace will send it on to him. And you said earlier that you're Jewish. I'm interested in what that means to you. Like, what does that mean that you're Jewish?
Sort of
like, does that just mean that you're descended from Jews, or is there a religious component, or is there an ethnic?
More ethnic. Like, it's just kind of the next thing you know, your cultural upbringing. Because when you're little, you don't think about it that hard, and the next thing you know, you just have a
not if you're not religious. I mean, I suppose if you were an Orthodox Jewish kid, you'd probably think about it.
Yeah, maybe. But what I'm saying is you just kind of, it just happens and it just is. And then the next thing you've had these experiences. So, for instance, I lived with my grandparents and they escaped Poland from the Nazis. And so I had to live with them, and they never said anything directly, but there was definitely a vibe and stuff like that. So all that kind of gets.
Did they come to Australia as refugees during the war or after the war?
They fled as Poland as the war started. And then they kind of did a bit of a dart about where the Soviet Union and Switzerland and I think, stopover in Italy. But then they ended up coming on a boat to Australia.
Exactly the same as my grandparents.
Yeah. So you have that. And then I went to Sunday school, I went to synagogue, but it wasn't quite I had the two sides in my family, or at least 1.5 sides on my mother's side. And she was the one who with the grandparents or whatever, who I just talked about. And they just thought God was dead. Like, they came from a real religious family in Europe, but because of the Holocaust, they were like, God is dead. They were more against viscerally kind of challenging of God than like Richard Dawkins, but just in a slightly different way. Yeah. Then on my dad's side,
with better reasons. Yeah, really. I mean, But then you can come out of the Holocaust and be like, God's great.
But so Jewish in other ways. Like, for instance, Yiddish was really important to them, the Yiddish language, and not like all the books in the house. And then their social life, their social groups was Yiddish speakers, and so like Jewishness ethnically, I guess, or whatever, was really important to them that way. Then on my dad's side, he kept these cards close to his chest, but I now realize he wasn't a magical, mystical thinker or whatever. So he'd take me to like regular synagogue. So I had like the two sides going on.
But then once you reached adulthood, let's say, your teenage years, how did living in a sort of secular, very non-Jewish country interact with your Judaism? Was there ever a point at which it became an identity?
Well, I just so I went to a normal state primary school, and then first year of high school, normal state high school, but I mucked around too much, got really bad marks. So my parents sent me to this strict Jewish school called Yeshiva College, even though that wasn't their background at all. This was like, side locks and skull caps and sit-sits.
Wow.
But it was a bit like if I was Catholic and my parents weren't that Catholic, religious or whatever, and they sent me to the nuns because they thought I was going to get a strict thing.
It was a strict,
Yeah, but it wasn't that strict.
Right.
So they really got it wrong.
It's like being sent to military school or something.
That's what they thought it was going to be. Yeah. But the problem was Yeshiva is the Melbourne outskirt of 770 Crown Heights, New York. It's like this missionary thing with the Rebbe, and they send out, rabbis everywhere. And so it was just like a loudmouth. It had a real loudmouth New York atmosphere to it. So there was lots of squawking, and you were allowed to
There was lots of squawking?
Yeah, you're allowed to be a smartass in class, in religious class, as long as you were funny. You know what I mean? So
I mean, that's Judaism for you.
Yes. So then
you can be a smartass as long as you're funny.
And I never really had I found it interesting, all the religious stuff. Like, I didn't find it annoying. I found everything I didn't like about yeshiva was just what I would have not liked about any high school. And I just thought it was a bit, I kind of go, this is kind of interesting.
Yeah, right. And so, but then I'm trying to get to sort of Israel and Palestine, like anti-Semitism and pro-Palestinianism, and so at what point after all that do you start to wrestle with what it means to be Jewish?
Just incidentally, as opposed to making some political statement, like yeshiva at that time. So my whole Jewish high school life, they weren't 770. Why is that in New York, not in Jerusalem, which was the home of the school? It's because at that point, I don't know where they are now. At that point, they weren't a pro-Zionist school. And it was notable, like on Israeli Independence Day, I'd get the tram and the other Jewish schools in the area, like the kids would have their Israeli flags, and yeshiva, we didn't say anything about it because they believed that it was like fine if you happened to be a Jew living in Israel. Like that was fine. They weren't that hardline, but they were like, you have to wait for the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah to come, and then he'll take us to Israel, and you're sort of preempting it and being a bit
interesting,
blasphemous or whatever. So incidentally, that was my school life. And incidentally, my grandparents, the ones who said God was dead, they were part of the Bund, which was in Eastern Europe. So before the Holocaust, and they were like the competitors to the Zionists. And they said, oh, listen, you should be able to be a Jew wherever you are. You don't have to go to Israel, right? Anyway, then the Holocaust happened. And then all the Bundists were going, well, that didn't work, did it? And they all became Zionists, except in this weird way, there was this group of Bundists, and they came to Melbourne, including my grandparents, and they set up the Bund in Melbourne. And when I was younger, I thought this was like something that was everywhere.
Right.
But it wasn't even like in London and New York, let alone Sydney, and it was like this absolute weird quirk that the Bund, because of the Holocaust, and the Bundists were either literally killed by the Nazis or their ideology was killed because they were like, oh, that did not work. We thought we could be Jews wherever we wanted, and our little, Polish socialist brothers would stand up for us or whatever, and that didn't happen, right? So I kind of grew up in this, I wasn't like anti-Zionist at all, but it was the two things, the family and the school, for their weird historical quirks, were not like big on talking about Israel. So...
And once you became a grown-up and interested in international politics, like at the time when you're doing Race Around the World, you become a celebrity. Like, what is that? You laugh when I say that, but you were a big celebrity quite young.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Like,
well, generally in the context of Australia back then, people weren't weird about Jews. Like, and especially like the history of Jews in Australia is not as heated as in other places. Just in Poland or Hungary, it's like they're still a bit bitter that we killed Christ or whatever. And that's just in the same way it's weird to have the prayer things on the Australian flag. It's not really this Australian thing to kind of be like, it says in the Bible the Jews killed Jesus and the blood of Christ is going to be on their hands. Or like, that's not really an Australian thing.
No, and we don't have a very long and old class system with all kinds of complicated rules like the Brits do, where there are in clubs and out clubs from particular names and heritages and families and stuff like that.
But one interesting thing about that that's been turned against the Jews is the Jews, when they came to Australia, they would set up, they were sort of a bit kind of more active in like setting up things like charities and contributing to philanthropy, because that seemed to be part of their history back then or whatever. And they were even more aggressive with that. And not only, not just Jewish charities or whatever, like donating to hospitals and everything like that. And because that was just the culture in a good way. But that's recently been turned against the Jews, like that long history of philanthropy in Australia. So now it's become like, look at the long history of this family, and they've donated. It is mind blowing. There'll be like a family that's contributed to like medical research in Australia, for the longest time, and that somehow is meant to be a long game plan by the Jews to kind of like
influence, to embed sympathetic people in institutions.
And it's so wild, this twist. I only 2 years ago, because my last book was called Puff Piece, and it was about the cigarette industry getting into vaping or whatever. So I ended up in this conversation with this guy who heads up this NGO around public health, and because he wanted to do a podcast or something like that. And he said to me, he goes, "John, you're Jewish." He goes, "Can you tell me why this is?" Because this guy wasn't Jewish. He goes, like, when it comes to like donations to like, because I've always worked in like public health and science and medical research in Australia. And he goes, like, the Jewish community is so overrepresented in like whatever. And this is like, I can't stress this enough. This isn't like Jewish medical research. This is like for the Australia. Whatever. And he said to me, he goes, "I don't understand it." He goes, "First of all, they're so overrepresented in wanting to, and then secondly," he goes, when other people, non-Jews, if we manage to get money off, then it's like the check just goes up in the bank account." He goes, "When Jewish people like make a donation. They want to catch up, and they're so curious about the latest, research. They want to know how everything's operating, like the medicine. They want to know more. They want to learn more and learn more.
We're nerds. Yeah, we're Talmudic little nerds.
So I was feeling proud of being an Australian Jew when I heard this thing happen, and then it's like 2 years later, all that's been twisted around, and it's become like, yes, and then they give a lot of money to this because that means they can then
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't help also that prominent Jews give, like all billionaires, give money to political parties and curry favor. I mean, that's just part of, unfortunately, the political game in Western democracies. And
Jewish
capitals.
Australia, all I can say, I tried really hard to make you look good, but look at this guy. They're really like pulling the rug out from under me.
No, but I'm just acknowledging that it's always a bad look when billionaires give money to political parties, because then it enables people who don't know what they're talking about on social media to go like, did you know that this Jewish billionaire paid all this money to Australia and that's why we're sending them bombs to bomb innocent Palestinian babies?
All I'll say this is there are powerful people of different persuasions in Australia, and it is very interesting how it doesn't have meaning if it's someone who's not Jewish. I don't want to inflame things or whatever, but sometimes like you look at things like property developers and like, oh, well, that property developer and he's of that persuasion, but it has no meaning because they're not Jewish. And I
think this is something that non-Jews it would be helpful for them to understand about the nature of anti-Semitism, because there's a lot of bloviating from like Israeli hawk types about that try to denounce anybody, for example, who criticizes right-wing Israeli policies as being anti-Semitic. And so the term anti-Semitic has, I think, somewhat justifiably come to be tarnished with a disingenuousness that like, oh, fuck, every single time you criticize any Israeli or Jew for doing anything, they throw their arms up and plead anti-Semitism. Please, like, cry me a fucking river. Like, sometimes you actually can be criticized for doing bad things. At the same time, the strong version of the definition of anti-Semitism is just that you should notice the ways in which the national conversation coheres so easily around criticism of people when they happen to be Jewish.
Yeah.
And a double standard gets imposed. Like you say with the property developers, like the sniveling, greedy property developer is likelier to be Jewish than not Jewish in the national narrative and in the way that the media portrays it. And the nefarious political donor pulling strings behind the scenes of political parties frequently will be disproportionately Jewish in the way we tell the story, more so than is true in reality.
I kind of feel like if someone's shtick is that they've got a problem with Israel and Jews in Israel, they can't bend over backwards to try to then have a problem with Jews in Australia. Like, obviously everything's open for criticism or whatever, but if you're shtick, by the way, if you don't have a problem, if you just want to be an, does that make sense what I said? No. Okay. So
not to me, but it may to someone.
Yeah. So for instance, if you're going, I don't have a problem with Jews, I only have a problem with everything around Israel or whatever. It's like, okay, we're in Australia here. I'm in Australia. So therefore you just don't get to suddenly have a secondary problem with Jewish people.
But they claim that they don't.
They
claim that they have a problem with Zionists, which often becomes a code word for Jews, but they will quite emphatically say, I'm not anti-Semitic, I don't have a problem with Jews, I have a problem with a settler colonial genocidal state.
Yeah, okay.
And so Zionists in Australia have to be held accountable for the actions of that
look, I'll give you one example because we're just kind of going, is like if someone is of the left and they say, oh, actually, Jews are actually functionally white. And so therefore, in the context of Australia, that has this, it's like, suddenly it's like, okay, fine, maybe you're right, but then stop saying you just have a problem with Jews in Israel. Because suddenly you've come up with this little bit of rhetoric, which means you can just like, Jews are a problem everywhere in the world.
But to say that Jews are white is not to say that they're a problem. To say that Jews are white is to say that they...
You really like a fight, don't you?
To say that Jews... I like to give credence where it's due.
I'm not having an argument with them saying, maybe they're right. Maybe it is a problem that Jews are white. What I'm saying is, stop saying you just have a problem with Jews in Israel, or you just have a problem. Like, as soon as you say, oh, also on top of that, Jews are white, and therefore that has this meaning all over the world, suddenly it's like, okay, just tell the truth. You have a problem with Jews in Israel, you have a problem with Jews out of Israel.
But their problem with Jews out of Israel, as they see it, and I'm just trying to unpick this so that we can, laser our critique as, and hone it as deftly as possible. The claim would be that the problem they have with Jews outside of Israel is Jews outside of Israel playing the anti-Semitism card, playing the disadvantaged minority card, playing the history of the Holocaust and thousands of years of dispossession card in order to give them a pass to do things to Palestinians that no other group of people would be permitted to do without criticism, that they can hide behind.
But I think there's just so much fault. Like most minorities say that, people, and rightly so, there'd be Muslims that say there's Islamophobia, and there'd be examples where they're over-egging it. There'd be black people, trans, so it's just sort of a bit weird to kind of just focus on the Jews and just not mention it in the broader context.
Yeah, I mean, that exactly. I think that is the more laser-pointed critique, which is the double standard, which is a point that David Baddiel makes well in his book Jews Don't Count, where his basic point is... But I think
you're the problem too. I know you don't consider yourself technically Jewish. You say you've got a Jewish background because you want to be in this kind of razor-sharp thing. You want to go, I don't want people to think I believe in like the supernatural Jewish stuff or whatever. Yeah, but Jews just like think everything in the blah blah in a way that then other people aren't applying the same razor sharpness to themselves.
No, but the world would be a better place if they did. So one can only lead by example, surely.
Okay, sure. Okay,
you know what I mean? I mean, it's a bit like what you were saying about the Sikh person at the neo-Nazi rally, or what I was saying about, why don't we eat babies? You sort of have to get to you have to start doing get the scalpel instead of the sledgehammer, and start really trying to figure out what's going on. And I think what's going on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you might be
I think you're just getting the world's best. If you're talking about Jews in Australia, I think you're giving the best faith interpretation of and like you're picking together these little things to make it sort of sound like there is a validity to attack Jews in Australia, and which you could just do for anything about any topic or whatever.
And I do.
Yeah. Okay,
I mean, if instead of sitting in front of a Jew, I was sitting in front of... I think
it's a far stronger argument to say, for me to make the observation that some people on the left who say that they don't have a problem with Jews in general, they've just got a problem with Israel or Zionism, then suddenly come up with these secondary problems about Jews in Australia, and I mean another one,
right? But give me those secondary problems.
So another one is where someone immigrates from Israel to Australia, and then they set up a small business here, a little restaurant or whatever, and then they get attacked. They're vandalized. This all happens this week, and then it becomes like, hang on, I thought you said you had a problem with Jews in Israel. Here we've got not only a Jew not in Israel, we've got a Jew that has left Israel and come here, and then you're vandalizing each other. And this is all true this week. This isn't whatever. And so then I kind of go, well, like, and you can do your little pulling this from this to this to this to say like why, but then I just kind of go, no, you lied. You said you only have a problem with Jews around things.
Yeah, but it depends who you're talking about. I mean, at the risk of doing my Talmudic this and this and this and this, I mean, I do think it's important to. I think you're being slightly unfair in the sense that I'm trying to unpack exactly what it is that we're talking about. So hang on. An attack on a Jewish, deli, for example, and defacing the deli, that is anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Right? That is a clear case of discriminating against somebody because of their ethnicity or their religion.
Okay. Yeah, but
so I would completely agree with you that the person who condones that attack cannot make the claim that they're only against the Israeli government. They actually are against Jews. Yeah. So, but there is. I don't think it helps our understanding of anti-Semitism to just to say that.
I'll give you two other examples about why I'm right and you're wrong, right?
Please.
Imagine some Australian who's a black Australian or whatever, and he wants to tell a story. He goes, listen, just over my life, I've noticed, and it doesn't happen all the time. He goes, I'll be going through a shopping center and I'll be targeted because of my black skin. I can tell the security guard, I can feel it, and it's like it happens to me more than other people. And then you get there with your little Talmudic thing and going, oh, hang on, yes, but maybe they were following you and you didn't see that afterwards. They also followed 2 white people, or maybe it wasn't because of your skin color. It was like you're dressed in a way that suggested that you were poor. So they were worried about that and had nothing to do with you. It's like you can just go on. But for God's sakes, just let the guy tell his story. And there's truth to it, what he said or whatever. Or if someone said to like Waleed Ali, a Muslim Australian, and someone said to him, hey, I bet you forced your wife to wear the hijab because you follow the Quran and the Quran's a blah, blah, document of evil, blah, blah, blah. It's like we could unpick it and kind of go, well, people do have a right to say things about the Quran. Oh, it is true that this thing, but it's like the context of them attacking him is to try to use him as a totem to kind of like spread a message of Muslims are dangers in Australia and he's a so I just feel like you're doing that with this whole picking apart. There's sort of like there's a easier, smoother explanation. And
yes, but you just have to put flesh on the bones of that explanation, which you just did.
Yeah,
but you can't until you've put the flesh on the bones and like made the point you just made about the black person being profiled.
Yeah,
is the point that I was alluding to when I mentioned David Baddiel's book, Jews Don't Count, which is we have all agreed on the left in the past 5 or 10 years that the claims of the victimized party are paramount. The man does not get to say in the workplace, seriously, babe, I wasn't being sexist. You're overreacting.
Yeah.
It's the woman who gets to declare that what she experienced was sexism, and the man has to respect that. Similarly, the black person who thinks they're being profiled has standing to claim that that's the case without having the caricature of Josh Steps, which I'm not, which you think I am, pull it all apart and go like, oh, hang on, but maybe it was this or maybe it was that. The only minority group, according to Baddiel, that doesn't get that benefit of the doubt is Jews. And that's how anti-Semitism works in modern Western liberal democracies.
Sure.
It's the double standard in which Jews don't get the same standing as other people. They don't get, if I say to people who attack me on Twitter, as I did many times in the months after October 7th, when I found myself on the Jewish side of this, that's a bit anti-Semitic. The way you're talking about Zionists loving the blood of Palestinian babies and, Zionists hiding behind their whiteness to cry fake tears, while actually holding the reins of power smells a bit like anti-Semitism, when those colleagues of mine would then turn around and say, no, you're being silly, you're overreacting. I didn't say Jews, I'm not being anti-Semitic, I'm talking specifically about Zionists. They are depriving me of the benefit of the doubt that we give to every other minority. So I completely agree with that.
Yeah,
but I think you need to listen to more of my podcast and read more of my columns to understand what the actual picking apart is here.
Sure.
Because I'm not just playing a dancing game of like, oh, how many fairies stand on the head of a pin and we can never say anything because we have to get so bogged down in details that we can never make a generalization.
Yeah.
What I am doing is ensuring that our generalizations are grounded in realities that could be understood by the other side, so that when we have conversations, everybody can find some kind of common ground onto which they can grasp, and it doesn't just sound like people are speaking inside their echo chambers of hysteria by waving their arms and going like...
that's fair enough, because I could sound like I could sound like a lunatic.
Well, not a lunatic. It just could sound like you've got a story about the way Jews get treated, and until it actually lands with specifics, the virulently pro-Palestinian anti-Zionist could say, well, all very well for you to feel that way. I feel differently.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So you had the score at the end of your podcast where it's like...
Well, it's my podcast, so I would always win.
You're going to put graphics on it, sort of like... And you're also going to do a voiceover. You'll get the footage of me leaving, and you go in a voiceover going in. And after we left, John turned to me and said, "You were right, and I was wrong." And that's when I realized I'd gazumped him.
No, but I mean, it is fun. The reason I asked about your Jewishness and your Jewish identity, and maybe we can wrap up by talking about your Jewishness since the October 7th attacks, is that it's been a wild ride, I think, to be a Jew in the past year, in the sense that I have I mean, I was bar mitzvahed. Like you say I'm like nominally Jewish, but yeah, my mum wasn't Jewish.
You're nominally
but
Jewish. More more fact checking. I see. I have to be like. I just fact check every sentence.
I am. Look.
Okay,
I'm
what's
Jewish
your thing
enough
about
for
it
Hitler.
since October 7? Just yes.
Well, I mean, I think it's forced a lot of Jews to realize the depth and scope of the conundrum that they're in, and like it was all very good to kind of prance through culture feeling like a member of society, but noticing how quick the mainstream narrative is to pounce on Jews as as being members of, or let's call them Zionists, as being members of a nefarious group that is doing the world ill, has been bracing.
I've noticed in Australia, my brain's not as expanded. I can't solve all the world's problems, but I do live in Australia, and so I can hold that in my head. And I have noticed this thing through cherry picking and omissions to kind of build a story in Australia of Jewish power that just doesn't add up when you start expanding it and start going, okay, let's look at all the examples of when a non-Jewish group or someone from a non-Jewish group kind of puts their hands up and tries to shut someone down. And so this is, can I explain it this way? You have to accept this because I can't explain this any simpler. So just say yes at the end of this.
Yes.
So if you kept a record of every time a Jew in Australia ran a red light, you'd have data to support the claim that Australia has a Jews running red light problem. But then if you started taking note of everyone who's running a red light in Australia, not just Jews, but suddenly you would not have data to support the claim that Australia has Jews running a red light problem. And so does that make?
Yeah, it does.
Yes, and so I'm talking about like in the art sphere, in the creative sphere, which most people watching won't be part of. So this might sound a little bit confusing about why.
Well, no, but a lot of the flare-ups have been in that. A lot of the shitstorms, right, from the Sydney Theatre Company people wearing the Palestinian
if you have
scarves.
if you have a story of ABC management, do not build on this. Please do me a favor of not building on this. Just take this. Don't say
I'm just going to take it.
Turn off the microphone after it. I just want to give a simple example. I just want to give you an example.
Yes.
If you hear a story of there was someone who said something critical of Israel or Jews who worked for the ABC.
I didn't even open my mouth.
Then they got reprimanded by ABC management.
Hypothetically.
You can kind of go, Then the bit that they're leaving out, which is absolutely true, Jewish people who've worked for the ABC have also been contacted by ABC management and told to watch what they say and write. And so suddenly it's like it's not ABC management is suddenly on the side of the Jews or whatever. They've reprimanded the Jews just like they've reprimanded, the non-Jews or whatever. So anyway, don't add any.
No. Well, but I think I can add something which is positive and constructive and non-critical, which is to say that different forces act in different ways. And I think sometimes what makes it easy to peddle anti-Semitic narratives is that the way that pro-Israeli influence can manifest itself will be through powerful, rich people on like a WhatsApp group coordinating an overt pressure campaign to try to persuade like a media board of directors to, take action. But the way that the anti-Jewish, the anti-Semitic pressure occurs is much more grassroots. It's much more a groundswell. And that's often, I think, manipulated by social media algorithms where Hezbollah and China and Iran have their thumbs on the scales of what we see. And so people don't really notice it as much. But it's a messier thing to try to get your head around the way that like a pro-jihadist, pro-death cult, Jew-hating miasma can manifest itself than it is to go, look at these anti-Israelis, look at these pro-Israelis.
Can I just
trying
say,
to pressure management.
My book's really fun. Like it is this adventure. This sounds like, just in case I've come across, I can't imagine.
You're on the wrong show, John.
I can't imagine why I would have come across as like overly like an academic or whatever. But it is like a roller.
It's fun. But all your stuff is fun.
Yeah.
You're a goofball.
I not break into, what do the lawyers tell me? I make my way into.
Yes, there's no breaking
mansion.
and entering.
Yeah, there's no, God knows.
No.
So anyway, get it before it's pulped.
It's never going to be puffed. It's going to be recommissioned for a second, third, fourth, and fifth.
I meant pulped by the
powers that be.
Yeah.
And so, lastly, on that, the thing about the ABC, you're just broadening that conversation. What have you made of all of the various flare-ups and skirmishes that have happened, not just in Australia but all around the world in the past year? Where this sort of takes us into like, I suppose, cancel culture and our tolerance for different ideas and so on, like, people being either demoted or...
So, okay, you talk about cancel culture. And so the sort of the struggle I have, or the tangles I have, is that for the past 10 or so years, a reality has been set up and accepted by most people that if you're offended by something, try to screw them over, contact their advertisers, contact their boss, create a fuss, and hopefully they'll kind of be deplatformed, right? So that's kind of been happening for 10 to 15 years, right? So then since October 7, that's kind of continued from both sides, pro-Israel, anti. They've been continuing this thing that has been set up for 10 years of like trying to screw over someone that they disagree with. And so I kind of say, listen, I'm against deplatforming people, and not only that, my work. I platform people. Goddamn, in this
Gavin McInnes is in the book.
I talked to Gavin McInnes, and Professor Griff was cancelled for being. So I'm like, so I'm against that. But if you set up a society in which that's the norm, you can't complain when like people sort of practice it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of the stuff since October 7, where I'm from both sides, where they're trying to cancel each other. It's just like, well, what did you expect? That's what you have tolerated and have said is a good thing for the past 10 to 15 years. Maybe not your audience, but I'm talking about...
certainly not my audience.
Yeah, I'm talking about people in the art space who might be a bit more progressive and whatever. It's like, if you didn't want people to trying to cancel people over whichever side, over Israel, Palestine now, you shouldn't have, for the past 10 to 15 years, set up a reality where that's the reality of the progressive space of like, and it's a good thing, is like when you're upset or you're offended, then try to, contact the person's commissioning editors or their bosses or their advertisers, which absolutely has been the norm. And it's like, so I kind of disagree that looking at this thing since October 7 and everyone trying to cancel each other as being this sort of like standalone thing that we have to look as a standalone thing.
Yeah, no, here. But I think what's happened is that the starkness of the reality of the consequence of using that tactic has been elevated on both sides, and both sides can see how painful and ultimately counterproductive it is to just try to get each other fired or dragged through the mud. Instead of, the correct response, and I've made this case privately and publicly to people who I disagree with and who I agree with since October 7th, which is to attack people's ideas rather than to attack the person and their livelihood. John Safran's book is Squat, a Week Squatting at Kanye's mansion.
It's funny.
It's not at all as boring as this conversation.
It's funny. I swear to God, it's funny.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks. That was great.